Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Brunecki, and I'm Director of DAM Contemporaries. I'd like to welcome you to our Logan Lecture tonight featuring Dana Schutz. We are thrilled to have Dana speaking as a part of the Logan Lecture series tonight in conjunction with her exhibition at the Denver Art Museum titled Dana Schutz, If the Face Had Wheels. This exhibition is organized by the Neuberger Museum of Art at Purchase College, a state university of New York, and the exhibition at the Denver Art Museum is funded by Vicki and Kent Logan with additional support provided by the Hamilton Collaborative. Special thanks also goes to the Friedrich Petzel Gallery in New York for their help with the exhibition as well. The exhibition opens to the public this Sunday, November 11th, and will be on view through January 13th, 2013. We are so proud that we are able to bring artists of such a high caliber as Dana Schutz to Denver to speak as a part of the Logan Lecture series. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Vicki and Kent Logan for their generous and ongoing support of this series, which would not be possible without their support. I would be pleased if you would join me after the talk for further conversation at Mad Wine, which is located just across the plaza. Complimentary snacks and a cash bar will be available. At this time, I'd like to invite William Morrow to the podium to introduce tonight's artist. William is the newly appointed Polly and Mark Addison Associate Curator of Contemporary Art, and we are thrilled to have him here.
Good evening. I'd like to also thank Kent and Vicki for being here tonight and for supporting this lecture series. The Logan Lecture Series is a rare opportunity to have a platform to learn and listen firsthand from artists as they share their passion and inspire others, and that I think that's an important thing. And I also would like to say a special thank you also to our DAM Contemporaries board who volunteered to help man these events, and also DAM Contemporaries for championing this lecture series. And I'm proud to be spearheading the 2013 Logan Lecture Series, which you'll hear about very soon. There's something profound and often illuminating about experiencing an artist's work for the first time. And I distinctly remember the first exhibition I saw of Dana Schutz's work. I attended her groundbreaking exhibition at the Contemporary Fine Arts Gallery in Berlin in 2005. And here was a young American woman, only a few years out of grad school, and I had never seen anything quite like it. I experienced for the first time Dana's wit and ability to make the impossible possible, and to bring the surface of her canvases to the surface of her canvases the impulses that we would normally suppress, or to make the irrational rational. Even then, it was clear that nothing was off limits for Dana, and it was inspiring to say the least. In Berlin, there was a painting titled The Autopsy of Michael Jackson, and coincidentally, it's on the screen behind me, so that's handy. Mind you, this piece was painted well before Jackson's death, but there he was, nude, exposed for the first time, vulnerable, and painted in such a way that the viewer was forced to reconcile with Michael as a person and not the persona as the king of pop that we've always known. And as you'll see, Dana continues to create scenarios like this in her paintings, where they create similar immersive experiences that can force the viewer to question reality and our perceptions of the norm. So what's funny is back in 2005, I was actually the director of 21C Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was traveling with the founder, Laura Lee Brown, who I'm pleased to welcome in the audience tonight with her family. And she and I saw this painting in Berlin, but regrettably we did not acquire the work, or the Jackson painting. But you can imagine my delight when I arrived in Denver to find out that the Jackson painting, in fact, was in the collection of Kent and Vicki Logan, as well as the more recent but important work titled Carpenter 2010, which both happen to be part of the largest museum exhibition to date, with over 40 paintings and drawings that open to the public here at the Denver Art Museum this Sunday. So Dana's having an incredible career, considering she graduated with her MFA from Columbia just 10 years ago. Prior to Columbia, she received her BFA at the Cleveland Institute of Art and has also studied at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, as well as the Norwich School of Art and Design in Norwich, England, which we chatted about a moment ago, and might have to revisit that later, because I did my graduate studies at University of East Anglia, also in Norwich, and I can't help but think that the people of Norwich might have inspired some of the figures in her paintings. So she's had solo exhibitions and dozens of group exhibitions in museums across the country and internationally. And I should mention there's a solo exhibition of her drawings at the MCA Denver if you haven't had a chance to go see that. I think it's up through January. Her work has also been acquired by important private and public collections, and I'll just name a few. Dana's work is included in the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA, and globally in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, and I think I'll pronounce this correctly, the Honart Museum in Tehran. Dana has been the recipient of multiple awards, including the Louise Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award, and more recently, the Columbia University Medal for Excellence. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dana to the stage and to share with us the mind behind this wonderful world we have come to admire in her drawings and paintings. Dana?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you guys all for coming. It's so great to be in Denver, I have to say. Very arid and landlocked and dry. It's not a flood. But I'm starting with this. Oh, wait, how do I start this? I forgot. I'm so sorry. Do I press this? There we go. So I'm starting with an image that I made 12 years ago. And when I first started thinking about contemporary art or being aware of it, it was sort of in the mid to late 90s. And at that time, I felt like it was a really permissive time for painting. There was a lot of painting going on, but I also felt like, there was like painters who I really liked, like Laura Owens, or I guess there was like Luke Timons was someone that I was looking at. But there were a lot of painters where it felt like they were using painterly language in a way where it was very aware of itself, almost like a catalog of different painterly gestures or languages in one painting. Or they tended to be heavily influenced by photo or ideas of academic painting. So for me, it was a big question of like how to begin to come up with imagery. And I wasn't working from photographs, but like in this like early painting, it looks like I was trying to make it look like it came from a photograph. And I think part of that was I sort of felt like it wasn't quite as subjective, so it was okay. Because if something was already pictured, then it was somehow important. So I was starting to think of like, how do I make paintings that are my own imagery, paintings that didn't have a photographic source or were from observation. But at this time I was asking friends to sort of describe objects that didn't exist and take pictures of them, trying to like, this one actually was from a photograph, but I thought she looked like she was doing kung fu in the end, I don't know, but she's sort of, oh no, I think there's an issue. Sorry.
It's okay. Let's just make sure it's...
Oh, there we go. Thanks so much. So this was a painting also from around that time, and it was never finished. And I was just thinking about how to make a painting where maybe, like an impossible painting. So I was thinking about a situation where you couldn't quite paint something from observation, and there was maybe only one witness or audience for it. So I was thinking about the last thing you see before you die. And the thing that I was interested in is like everyone will have this experience, but it's something that you can never tell, and like, or let alone paint, unless unless you're like doing plein air painting, and then that's a problem, or literally the last thing you see. But so I was thinking like the last thing you see before you die in a boating accident. So I don't know, but it was really tough, because I didn't have that much information. So it ended up being like, I don't know, these sort of Jesus beams in there, and I'm alive, so I didn't really know how to proceed, and I also don't really boat very often. So I felt like I really needed information. So, but I was really lucky, you know, because so I started looking at what was around me at that time, and at this time I was still in graduate school, and you know, I was lucky because there was a great group of people that I went to school with, and also a lot of single people at that time. It was sort of at the end of the first year of graduate school, and people had sort of exhausted all potential of hooking up at that point. And you know, it's limited, it's a small program. So I was thinking like, well, you know, how, so I started thinking about like how to make partners for my single friends. So this was for my friend Susan, and like Susan was from Alaska, and she was a Scorpio. She is a Scorpio. And she was very intense and sort of quiet, and I thought she would be really good if she was with someone who was slightly older than her. You know, maybe he likes to cook and stay in a bit, or I thought maybe he'd be sensitive so he would have red hair. But then he just seemed creepy, like this like heavy breather, like it's just not gonna leave. And so I made 12 of these paintings for different friends, and I always felt like they would feel, many of them were rejected by those friends. But I thought that it was, you know, as long as they felt like they were finished if you could sort of name them, or if you could, they felt like a person. And so I had all this information to imagine a person, but I could never figure out the space they were in. So that was this problem for me. They were always in this sort of photo backdrop, no place space. So I started thinking about these objects that maybe, like, you know, at the end of, like maybe I started asking friends what sculptures they had made when they first started making sculpture. And part of the thing that I really liked with that was it's such an awkward thing, like beginning sculpture, so much of the form depends on its ability to stand up, you know, and they're also usually heavily symbolic. So my friend Chris had the best sculpture ideas. So this was supposed to be about the death of rock and roll. But so that's like a Beatles album, and I don't know, Kafka and the death of rock and roll. But I was trying to imagine places where they could be that were maybe outside of an art context. So I was thinking about places like maybe coming up with a place that maybe I had been, like a place in Michigan, or like thinking about the temperature or the space. And I felt like that was a really big thing, because if there's a space that you could believe in the painting, that felt more risky to me, because then I was really saying, okay, no, this is a picture. And it's something that doesn't exist, but it's something that I'm going to believe in as I'm making it. And I was also painting sneezes at that time. But I just thought it was like, you know, it's such an event, like a very mini event, but also like I wanted to paint. It's also something that you can't observe, but I really wanted to paint like what it felt like to sneeze. So, you know, there'd be this like tension of like, you know, closing your eyes. So I was, you know, so I was making these paintings, and this was sort of related to the, maybe the imaginary people for people, but I was thinking of a fictional situation where it would be very limited, where maybe there was only two people, like, so I was thinking about The Last Man on Earth from observation. And in that case, I was thinking that it would be maybe one subject and maybe one painter who would be me. And then thinking about the paintings almost as artifacts from this particular situation. But I was interested in it as thinking about, because if there are just two people, who's to say like what actually something really looks like? I feel like there always needs to be a third person to be a judge. So this is him as a sort of a mix between a proboscis monkey and a man. You know, when I was thinking about how he could look, I thought, well, maybe he had worked in an office, so he had a comb over that had grown out, or, you know. I mean, here he just looks like a monkey, kind of, I don't know. I killed him right away, because part of it was I wasn't interested in this idea of narrative as, you know, I wasn't also interested in this idea of like end of the world scenarios or how the world ended, but more in a situation of having one subject that could be a malleable subject, or a subject that could be put into play. And so I thought you can make paintings of him, and he would be different in each painting. And so here he is, he's just posing, I guess. And he always sort of seemed sort of out of it. A lot of people said he sort of looked like Chris Elliott a bit, or just an amalgam of tragic characters. But around this time, I started thinking about color. I didn't know exactly what to do with color. I always felt like it seemed like something that was just attached to the material that came out of the tube. And I was thinking, I was making this situation that was very subjective, so you could really use color in a way that it could be expressive. So I was thinking I was using colors that could react, or also that could have a kind of physical sensation to them. I was finding certain purples were great because they sort of receded in space. I think in this painting I wanted his body to feel like it was flat with the picture plane, or it's almost like one with the landscape. And here he's just really sunburned, like he needs. I didn't use models for these at all, and I didn't realize it till later that I was always sort of putting the penis in the wrong spot. It was kind of something like until after the fact I was like, that's not quite where it goes. But I don't. So I thought like I was going to make all these paintings of him, and I ended up getting really antsy. Like I didn't want to do this, just making portrait after portrait of him. So I was thinking in that type of situation, if you were to make more people, like how would you do it? Barring the obvious. So I was thinking, well, if you could make more people out of him. So this is him as the rock band, the Breeders. And so in this case, it was sort of like a way to make your own entertainment in that situation. So those two halves of his body, those two Henry Moore shapes, those are like two halves of his body. And you can sort of see fingers and the features. And I was really, interested in these paintings as being fictional, and the paintings themselves having a kind of logic that could follow a kind of fictional logic. And the thing that I think is so great about fiction is that it's a space that is separate from the world, but a space where you can sort of reorganize the hierarchies of the world within it. So that even goes into like decisions of like how you choose to represent, or how you choose to represent the trees, or like what they're sitting on, or the different, you could choose to make something flatter or something else. So this is just him at night, making I thought maybe he should make something too. So he's making it's either a sculpture or thought it could feel like a camera or a painting or something that projects the stars. So at this time, I felt like I didn't want to be making paintings of him anymore, so I stopped. And I was thinking a lot about abstract painting. When I paint a lot of these paintings earlier on, I was thinking about painting more as building. So even the act of painting as building. So I would think about one brushstroke kind of existing on top of the other in a way where you could like make a tree almost like you're making a house. And when I'm in the studio, a lot of times I'll mix up paint for many days beforehand. So I'll have all this sort of paint at the ready, and so I could, paint and not stop. But at this time, I was thinking a lot about abstract painting, and, I'm not I don't really see them as so separate, but I think the thing that I was interested in abstract painting, particularly painterly abstract painting, was I just didn't, it seemed like in the past, maybe it had been very overdetermined, at least maybe in America, but I was sort of thinking about like how to look at it again without thinking about, like sort of after this idea of progress and all these things. But this is not an abstract painting. This is a zebra, like a pile of zebras, but it just sort of turned into one. This is a painting of P.J. Harvey. So I was making also these like large vertical paintings of female musicians, and I think I was interested in painting her because she's such a great performer. Do you guys know her? Sometimes people don't. But she was like really, both really masculine and feminine, and I wanted the painting to feel, I think there's something about when you're painting something that's very vertical, like it feels very physical when you're doing it, and I wanted to paint her almost in a way where she felt like sculpture, something that was self-built or something. And this is a painting of Uta Kothur. who's a painter and performance artist and musician. And I remember she performed when I was at Columbia in graduate school, and this was in, I think in 2000. And it was crazy. It was like a really intense performance. And you know, at this time, there's a lot of people making paintings with the sort of printer, and also or paintings that dealt with architecture. And then she came out, she gave this performance, and it was everything that I thought you shouldn't do. You know, like it was like evoking she was talking in manifestos. She was like beating the ground with a hammer. There was paintings being projected behind her, and I got really tense. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like really, and I thought, that's great. You know, like she's doing something that you feel like you shouldn't do, or that maybe it's a cliche to do, you know, to act out the avant-garde in this way, but then it actually has that effect. And so I thought it was really interesting. I was wondering if it could happen in a painting in that way. And of course it doesn't, like a painting does its own thing, but so I was thinking about making a painting of her performing. And so at this time, so I was making these paintings of these large female, not large female, but large paintings of female performers, and thinking a lot about abstract painting. And I was really stressed out. I was living up in Harlem. A lot of my friends were in another studio building, and I was just feeling really overwhelmed. So I was making these paintings, and I started making these drawings while I was on the phone of people who could eat themselves. And there was a point where I felt like that I began to like them more than what I was painting at that time. But I thought, okay, I could never make paintings of these. This shouldn't be my work because it's too angsty. It seems like bad therapy. This is a bad painting idea. But then I became more interested in them, almost as a problem, like a kind of what if scenario. Like if you took death out of the equation, if you ate yourself, then you could remake yourself to be any way you wanted to be. Like you would digest yourself and you could rebuild. So I thought it was a very kind of generative situation. This is a person eating their own face. And I just, in order to paint something, you have to be able to visualize it. And I thought that was a really difficult thing to visualize, how it would happen, like how you would eat your own face. So I thought, would you start with, I guess your tongue would be important. I was thinking that eyes were a big deal, because without eyes, it's just not a face at all. It's just like a thing. So this is a person sort of picking out parts for themselves. And the way I was painting them, I wanted them to be sort of in between form, or kind of in a state of production. So it's sort of picking out, I guess those are breasts and those are noses on the table. And picking out eyeballs. And this person's just completely self-made. So I thought that they would just be they're really happy, and I thought they could be just very kind of low to the ground and sturdy and maybe Swiss or something, seems sort of Swiss. And I just thought, well, in that type of situation, making would be a necessity. So I thought, well, your building skills would have to be survival of the fittest. So I thought, well, the person would have extra fingers or something. But similar to the limitations of the situation with the last man on Earth from observation, I felt like that there was something with this that was also a problem. You could just keep on making paintings of this, and it felt very they were almost too autonomous. They could just eat themselves and remake themselves, and there was no reason to have them even in the same painting together, because they really wouldn't need to interact in any way. So I was thinking about if they did something together, made a building together, which at the time I thought that was the most communal thing, a very communal thing you could do. So here they're sort of using their shared parts to make a building. And I thought about what would be important in a society. There's, I guess, medicine and people building, and that's just a mess. but things aren't going well, you know, like in the background. But I was thinking that in the end, what became really interesting to me was the two girls in the front who were sort of smoking outside the building, and I really like that moment like where you can share ideas in a very intimate space. So I thought maybe, you know, this girl was sort of talking, and the other girl was sort of not listening. The girl who's stacking rocks. So this was in 2004, in the lead up to the presidential election in 2004, the Bush-Kerry, and I was initially thinking about making a one big person out of many, or one person out of many, and then I just, you know, I was listening to a lot of radio at that time, and I just couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen. So I thought about I'll just make the Bush administration. So it started off really intuitively, kind of with Rumsfeld's foot, and then just sort of went up, and then over, and then this is Cheney. And I don't know what it's like your votes or the plans. I don't know. But I thought, you know, and my friend afterwards said it sort of looked like an elephant, the shape of it, and I wanted to, but I really wanted it to be unclear, like whether it was. Like what kind of event it was, like whether it was a celebration or whether it was some sort of media disaster, whether they were going backwards or forwards. But so that was or these could be like sort of just married cans or just like it's a mess or something. But you know, I look at a lot of other paintings, and this comes up a lot, like this idea of like referencing. And I'm not interested in making paintings about art history, but I do look at a lot of paintings. And I really think that there's a kind of, at least the way that I look at paintings, I feel like that most people do, is like you tend to have an intimate relationship with individual paintings rather than an intimate relationship to the canon of art history. So I really like when references happen in the paintings, but I want them to be very loose and not to be so like static in the painting. But I really love that painting of by Philip Guston, Nixon on the Beach, where he's walking with his big bloated foot, and I just thought that would be I like that kind of parallel between this subject and that, and I don't know. And this is sort of like a burial or an autopsy, and at this time, there was a lot of protests going on in New York, and I had never seen that many people, like where you look out and you'd see a whole landscape, where it's just streets after streets of people. So I wanted to make a painting where it felt like the entire landscape was just completely like made all out of people. How do I? Whatever. Sorry. So I like this idea that it was sort of. Like I wanted the big toe to be sort of pointing at maybe a singular viewer outside of the painting, and also for it to be unsure whether they were exhuming the body or burying it, but that it was much heavier and bigger than they could kind of handle. And I was looking at a lot of medieval paintings, you know, a lot of surgery paintings from the past. I always thought that they were about this kind of idea of a rational view of like where we were with science or something, but it was actually the opposite. Like the Eakins painting, the Eakins Clinic, it was people were really freaked out by it because the Civil War was going on, and people really distrusted surgeons, and they felt like there was this connection between like the body and the country, and also they call the doctors sawbones and everything. But in this case, I wanted it to feel like it was just this giant crowd. Kind of coming to see this thing that there's not very much you could do. This is a Gravity fanatic, and I don't know. I was just thinking, like, what's the most fanatic, like ridiculous, like difficult thing to be a fanatic about? And I just thought gravity, you know, because it's like it's not really in dispute. Like no one has a problem with it, and so I was thinking like, how would you paint that? And also, like, how does that subject exist? Like, does it exist in a situation where gravity is there? So I thought, well, or there's no gravity in the painting. So I thought, and also gravity is something that you can play with in depiction. Like, you can make things feel heavier than they are. You know, paint has its own gravity, but But I was thinking that it should exist, and she's using tape, because you don't have to defy gravity to use tape, I don't think. But taping all the objects down, including yourself. And this is the autopsy of Michael Jackson. And as William was saying, I made this painting in 2005, and it was at this time where he was in the media a lot for the child molestation case. And there was this moment where I was just thinking, like, oh my gosh, like, what's happened to Michael Jackson? I mean, you would sort of feel this way anytime you saw him in the media, but like, I felt like this sort of circle back to, like, 1984, and also just that sort of amount of time and how much can happen with a person, or even how much he had changed in that time. And it just hit me, I'm like, wow, Michael Jackson could die, like, in our lifetime. And I was also, I remember when I was younger, like, thinking, sitting watching the TV with my parents, and someone from the Mary Tyler Moore show they'd find out that they had passed away, and I had no idea who they were at all. So I was just thinking, like, well, that's crazy if Michael Jackson dies. But so I was thinking, like, it was a photograph that would be taken that hadn't yet. And also a question of, like, how to begin to depict that, because he always did have such a hand in his own image and such a weird relationship to the public. I sort of thought, who's to tell what kind of form he would be in when he died? But it was actually a really uncomfortable painting making it, and I had to stop midway through and paint something else, because there was something, I think he ended up looking more like how he looked at that time. And I don't know, it's interesting seeing it again, because I think that there's something where I feel like a painting can have a body to it, and I felt like there was actually a very intimate painting, even though he is sort of a big celebrity, or it's an image that exists in the world now. So I was wondering how it would be to see again, but I was happy it still felt intimate to me. And this is a men's retreat. But I don't know, I just thought, like, I use a place you would have to imagine, or if you couldn't, I don't know many people who would be able to go, but I mean, and so I was thinking, like, well, what would happen there? And I just thought, well, maybe there would be this moment where, people sort of go there to, like, consolidate power, or, like, blackmail each other. Like, these are people face painting, or they would go to sort of get to some idea of truth or something. But it's interesting, like, how the painting itself has changed, because I think when I made it, it was so much about this kind of conspiratorial space, like, where these powerful men would go, and then now it feels so much more like about almost like punishment or something, like, like there's hot coals, and they're sort of just lost in the woods. But that's Ted Turner on the lower end. And this is a painting sort of Mike Kelly. And, I had never been to LA before, and I was just sort of thinking, like, well, what, since I'm making this painting, I have been to LA. It's embarrassing, really. But, and I was just, like, thinking, like, well, what do people in LA do? And I thought, well, maybe they'd sleep in the grass. I mean, so I was sort of thinking about it, like, even how to begin making this painting. So I really was interested in the sort of feeling of, like, the flatness, or an aerial shot of grass, and maybe, like, sort of acne-scarred skin, and this kind of feeling of sleeping, and the sort of the pen leaking. When I'm making paintings, like for me, the thing that is when I'm, especially even painting pictures of people, like, I am very interested in, like, the space of the canvas, like the format, more so than I am with anatomy or anything like that. So a lot of times I'll start and I'll begin with a kind of compositional sketch, like trying to figure out how the figure should be, almost in an abstract sense, like within the structure of the canvas. And I'll modify the form so that it feels right. Like, his hand is very small. So at this time, I was making these paintings. I was write a lot in the studio. I feel like I should have switched these images. Sorry. No, but I write a lot in the studio, and I was writing about, like, this question of, like, how we would, and I liked it because it was sort of a question of, like, how a painting can't tell you exactly how to do something, but it could sort of tell you what it felt like to do something. So I was thinking about giving the wrong information to maybe a future fictive audience. So I wrote down this list of like how we would drive, how we would talk, how we would swim, how we would give birth, and so this is how we would give birth. And this was something on that list. It's funny with ideas for painting. Sometimes the choice of what to paint and what not to paint is really important to me, because I feel like some images, some ideas can really turn into a painting, or it feels like it can open up, and then some ideas don't at all. And with this painting, I thought, I don't know if I can paint that. Like, just because you start thinking about it, you think, well, what it entails, So I thought, well, as long as there's like a focus object for me, the painter, but also for her, the subject, and the viewer. So there's this sort of landscape area, escape route in the painting. And I really like those like sort of Hudson River School paintings in the way where they feel very science fiction but very old at the same time, almost like a bug trapped in amber. And so I wanted it to feel like that you kind of share her view, and that there is a definite kind of separation between her upper half and her lower half, and also between what was going on in that picture and what was happening on the bed. And this is how we would talk. And even, when there was, I was thinking about the head as being almost like this object and the phone being attached to the head, but these sort of marks on the glass being there like after she leaves. So at this time, instead of coming up with these fictions, I was writing a lot and also looking at language, and I was Googling. I Googled a phrase I'm into, in a way because I just feel like it sounds very chilled out and very general, but then once you start looking at what people are into, it gets really specific, like very, very fast. So there's all these lists of things, like I'm into navy blue, I'm into lemur racing, I'm into armhole shaping, things like this. So I was thinking about like, how would you make a painting of I'm into navy blue? So this is I'm into Jesus. And I don't know, I just thought like that, I don't know if you've ever seen this channel called the Worship Channel, and it just shows inclement weather like the whole time, and it just says worship at the bottom. And I just always felt like it was like this thing that was like a reminder to not go outside, because it was just horrible out there. So I just thought someone who's inside, and the sort of palette felt very like funereal and a kind of somehow tinfoil. It sort of reminded me of Jesus. This is I'm into minimalist tattoos, and I don't know. I just thought like if you were into minimalist tattoos, they wouldn't quite be like minimalist objects. But I don't know. I was thinking like who has minimalist tattoos? I think like printmakers do, and printmakers also have silver jewelry. So I wanted the painting to feel very flat, like almost like a hieroglyph, or where the painting kind of exists to show off these other objects in front of it. It's sort of cut off, but that's a chain that goes outside of the painting. And I was also cutting holes in paintings at this time too. I think I was questioning like pictorial painting, and and I am really pictorial, like in the way that you can put things in I believe in like sort of picture space. But at that time, I think this was maybe around 2008 or something, I was sort of really, somehow it just felt really, I was feeling really naive, or like it was out of it to make a picture. I really don't feel this way now. But so I was like doing these sort of interruptions in the painting. But I think I really still wanted them to feel like they were part of the image. So this is sort of black velvet. It's hard to tell, but there's sort of black velvet behind there, and I wanted it to read as something that was a very deep, dark space, like something that could either float in front of the figure or recede way back. And I wasn't interested in like cutting into the painting as sort of truth to materials or like showing the stretcher bars, but more of it being about illusion. And so this is a woman playing the guitar. But I just thought it looked like something sort of simultaneous, like someone being shot and also playing a folk song or something. at the same time. And I was also thinking about the canvas as like I was staining into the canvas with acrylic paint. And it's hard to tell from this painting, but there was actually a painting on the back of it that sort of came through to the front. So I was thinking about these moments of almost like pictorial elements that could be rearranged and sort of like halted moments where the subject matter could almost feel like props. And I was really thinking about like how I was painting at that time. I wanted them to feel less oily and less heavy. And I realize now that in order to do that, I just need to be drawing a lot more, and so I have been recently. But I was looking at these phrases, I think also the verbs, because they are more difficult to paint. So I was thinking about 3 verbs together, how they could sort of play off each other or make meaning between each other. So this is shaking, cooking, peeing. I just thought like shaking and cooking go well together, and like peeing and shaking go well, but like shaking, cooking, peeing, it's like a different situation, you know. But so I wanted everything to, like her body to feel like a machine, and her hand to be sort of balancing on this pile of things that aren't very stable. I thought her feet looked like dog paws, like something where you could. And this is swimming, smoking, crying. And I think there was something. When I was in high school, I was on the swim team, and I just remember that feeling of like being in your own lane and you're very much in your own headspace. And I remember, maybe it was because I was in high school, like this thing where you're like swimming and you're just screaming in your lane, because you feel like no one can hear you. Like you're underwater, until like I found out that like it's actually a really good conductor of sound, water is. So it's like it's kind of antisocial swimmer, but I was thinking like I wanted it to feel like the head to feel like an island, or everything was going on almost on the underside of a boat. And like smoking is a way, I think, maybe to signify that maybe something's potentially wrong, or also crying. But underwater, they don't communicate. I wanted the eye to look like a shark fin, and the iris to look like a bobber, and that hand to sort of just not be very effective, like a very ineffective flipper, And so I was having lunch with my friend. I was at this time I was sort of thinking about looking at things that don't really exist in language, like things that like maybe impulsive thoughts that could come to mind, but you don't ever say them at all. Like I think they come from the same part of your brain as swearing, or the flash thoughts. But I imagine that most everybody has these. Like if you imagine something that. An awkward social situation and you just swear in the shower or something like that. So I was thinking about looking at these sort of like impulses and actually seeing if they could open up into something, particularly because they were unusable and they didn't exist anywhere. Like so, for example, I was like having lunch with my friend, and there was this moment where I like noticed, maybe it was because the way the light was in the restaurant, but the moment I noticed that he had really blue eyes, I had this impulse to touch his eye, like at the moment of noticing. And then I thought, well, that's weird. And of course you don't do it because you're not crazy, So I was thinking like, well, how could that become an image, or how would that work as a painting? So I felt like everything about it would be about this sort of toppling, or that the coffee was important because it could sort of spill. And so I was like, covering up paints for the night. I mix a lot of paint, and so I was at the end of the night, I cut up all this plastic and sort of lay it over the paint and put it in the fridge. And there was this moment, I think simply just because the scissors were in my hands and I was like cutting, it was 4 a.m., and I just thought like, oh, cut your eyelashes, and I was like, well, that's crazy. That's nuts. But I was thinking about like, how could this exist as an image? And I thought, well, everything about it would have to be about the eyes. And that it would be more about this kind of like the blinking of the eyes and the talking of the mouth. And I thought it would be really important that they'd be on the phone, to have like a very like focused situation while you're doing something completely unfocused, or the other way around. And I wanted the whole painting to look like it was like looking in the mirror. And this is like the worst thing I can imagine, really, like scraping wood with your teeth. But I was thinking, like, you know, I like this idea that, like, maybe, like, you never think about your teeth unless someone says, think about your teeth. And I like the way that a painting can actually affect the space outside of it, or the viewer outside of it. And so I was thinking about a painting that could maybe be contagious. And so maybe if you could then think about your teeth also, then you could imagine maybe doing the thing. So she's sort of making a deck with her teeth. So I wanted her head to feel like a tool, and also like the wood curls, they sort of were reflected in the curls on the ground. And also the doubleness of sort of scraping down a painting. So I was thinking about all these ticks and like how they could be repurposed. And so I was thinking about maybe like building a boat while sailing. So this like action, or this activity where like everything is sort of, sailing is supposed to be very recreational, but like this act of like building something together. And I thought the figures could be, their whole figuration could be based on their sort of specialized tick or skill or something. So there's people who are scraping the boat. There's someone who's sort of pummeling nails. And when I was making these paintings of these people who were with these ticks, they started to feel a lot of them like endurance performance art or something. So I was thinking a lot about maybe these people could be half in between demonstrating the boat or actually using it or making it. So there's people who are sort of measuring the space that they're in and kind of working together but alone. And you know, a lot of people bring up the raft of the Medusa with this painting because it's large and it's of a boat, which is always like the fear. Like when I was starting the painting, I'm like, it's a large painting of a boat. People are going to say this painting, but I really wanted it to be much more central, like almost like it operated more like a fountain than it did about looking out towards the horizon. But there's these sort of synchronized swimmers on the horizon, and I was thinking about it more as like something on the horizon that they're completely ignoring and just doing their own thing. This is a painting of someone licking a brick. But, and this was coming a lot from drawings. There's something about this posture of having your hands open, and I felt like I wanted it to be like a painting that felt like it could lick you. Like the painting itself wanted to lick you, and that there's this sort of doubling of, because when you're making a painting, there's an action to it, you know. And recently I have been using scrapers and sort of oil crayons more and drawing a lot more into the paintings. And I really wanted there to be this sort of mirroring between the act of making the painting and the act of someone doing something. This is a painting of a flasher. You know, and I was thinking of like those frogs that are opened up, you know, like this kind of thing where if you were to take a painting itself and turn it inside out, and so they're kind of these things that cut along the seams, or a kind of almost like pushing itself up against the painting. I felt like the face sort of looked like a shark or something, or it felt like a stingray. This is someone just sort of taking a sweater off while pressing their knees up against the surface of the canvas while balancing on a rock. No, but I was thinking, like, you know, with these things, I was thinking the action itself isn't that spectacular, like licking a brick or like doing something like this. So I was thinking about it more as an action that could lend itself to depiction or action within the painting. And so I felt like that these things were very much about these subjects that were sort of the space was very compressed, and they were kind of almost smooshing themselves up against the surface of the painting. This is someone removing their bra from inside, which is hard to do when you're 14, I think, you know, from inside. And this is a woman hopping across a canvas. And you know, those sweaters, those big Irish sweaters, I feel like they're always uncomfortable for everyone. Like the people wearing them, the people near them, you know, like you don't even have to be touching them, and you're just uncomfortable. And like, so I was thinking like this kind of figure that could feel just as inanimate as maybe that tree, or just like a prop or the tree. I felt like the tree almost looked like a bowling ball, like you could sort of just roll it down and knock them all over. But that it was kind of in between something that was something being performed or demonstrated, or just like an actual awkward situation. I'll go through these fast, but these are more recent paintings. This is a person lighting their ear on fire, but I thought it was more like someone thinking. I wanted their face to feel very mechanical and the palette to be very cold, except for the heat behind the figure. And so that I really wanted to feel a lot like thought, you know, something very disembodied from the action that was happening. It's a person playing piano in the rain. And I was just thinking of these actions that also could be very demonstrative to the painting. When I'm making the painting, I was drawing these a lot on the canvas before I was starting, and then wiping it down. But I was more interested in these sort of two objects that could be of the same importance. So she's kind of the same type of weight and space in the painting as the piano. Like she's exactly, or bigger than the piano. And these are two sad people. And my friend said this looked like a breakup at Panera Breads or something. Like, I don't know. Like, it's like, what's with the bookshelf? Is this at Panera? But I was thinking about it because I had a friend who was, it's called Small Apartment. And part of it is because I think, you know, in New York there are a lot of small apartments, and I feel like emotions feel bigger in small apartments, you know? Like if you're going to be upset, you have to go to the bathroom, you know, spend a lot of time in the bathroom. But I was thinking about it because I had a friend who was very upset, and I just could not console her at all. It was impossible. And you try, and it doesn't work. And then there was a moment where I felt like I needed consoling, and I felt like my friend wasn't consoling me enough. So I was thinking about like making a painting about how to console someone else. I thought, even in the dumbest sense, like, okay, you just put your hand on the other person's hand. But I wanted also their features to be really schematic, like that you could, just enough that you could sort of get a feeling of who they could be or what the situation is. But I just thought it really was important that it was nice outside, because then you don't want to be inside. Like you just want to go get out of there. And also that their posture, like it was unclear whether they were just hunching because they were sad or because it's how they can fit in the picture. But so that's it. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, so we have some time to take some questions. I'd like to ask you to raise your hand and let us know if you have a question. We will bring you a mic, and please wait to ask the question until you have the mic. Thank you.
Dana, could you go back to the picnic scene? I think you skipped over.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious what led you to start taking chunks out of people.
Oh.
And burning the edges here.
Yeah. Well, I think I was thinking about it like an event or something that could happen outside of the painting and then affect some parts of the subject matter. But they really did. I felt like they started to feel more like props or cutouts. Either the paint itself, the black paint is more, it sits on the surface. So I was thinking about it more of an omitted image, or where you couldn't tell, kind of even narratively, if these things were actually even there doing that thing, or if they were organized afterwards. So it was like painting things. There was other paintings from that time too, where there was, yeah. And that was sort of like, I think just even at an abstract sense, I like that the subject in that painting because it looks very sculptural. Like there's this like really nice sort of arc in that painting. But yeah, I think I was making these paintings around the same time that I was also like cutting into the canvas, and so sort of. I was also trying to think about how I was painting. There was a moment where I sort of changed how I was painting. I didn't. Maybe around 2006, I felt like I wanted to change everything. So I just like took out color and started, the facture changed, and so it was really felt kind of scary at that time, but it was also like trying to start over, like trying to figure out how to begin to approach these subjects. But it was something I needed to do because it was like, I couldn't, I think it was right after the show that you saw that I was like, something has to change. I don't know. I think.
More questions? Here.
Dana, just listening to you, the implied, they're not really, there is an implied narrative to a lot of the conceptual basis for the paintings. It almost strikes me as a sort of a James Joyce approach to painting. It's almost a stream of consciousness. And I wonder for each sort of topic or theme is not the right word, but you go through and how would this look, or how many do you discard for? I mean, you must go through 10 sets of ideas for every one you pick, or 3 or 4. I mean, it can't be every one. And I'm just sort of curious how you decide, prioritize,
Yeah.
what am
I think
gonna
there.
do? Because it almost seems like these ideas just come into your mind, but there must be 20 a day that come into your mind, and then you don't paint 20 a day. I'm sort of curious about that whole process of selection.
I think there's that moment where you can get an idea for a painting and it can kind of hover there, and you can put pressure on it. So a lot of times I'll write them down, and there's like tons that I don't do, and I'm really happy that I did not do them. I'm trying to think of one right now that was, I don't know. But yeah, I think even, and I think that part of it, the reason why the ones I do choose to do, I feel like they can open up into something more, or you start to think of like how, like for example, the 2 people in the apartment, it was a thought where or the person playing piano in the rain, there's a moment where you think about it as almost just like a sentence or something, or a bit of an idea, and then you sort of think, well, how then could it exist? And I think part of the reason why I wanted to paint the 2 sad people was just because I thought, well, that's what I felt like I needed at that time. But also I thought it would be really weird as a painting, like maybe really a too dumb of an idea for a painting. But I thought that's interesting to like see if you can do it, or how you could do it. Like the same thing with the birth painting. There's a moment where I thought, okay, that's too intense, and then also very weird because it's, I don't know, it's just like a loaded subject maybe, and then thinking about how it could end up working. But then there's some ideas that just don't go anywhere. So it's sort of, when I was making the paintings of the self-eaters, I think that part of the thing that I liked about them was that, like, not only could they be just sort of about this sort of the pictures themselves, but I liked them as a situation where they could feel like you could talk about things that were bigger than them, like things where they were either the idea of being an individual or something that being in a society or in some sort of community, or these kinds of ideas of even like how to producing yourself, all these things. So I was interested in that too. So I think it's more like that. You sort of test the ideas. Some of them don't go anywhere.
It's almost as if you're painting psychological metaphors.
I don't know. I don't know if they're so psychological. Maybe they're. I never think about them as being psychological, but maybe they could be. I don't know. Trying to, yeah.
I found this almost the opposite of psychology. One of the things I really liked is that you didn't.
If you just hold one sec. Okay, one of the things I really like about the paintings is that they seem like they're not psychological to me. That you absolutely did not use a psychological framework to pursue whatever you were working on in each painting. And I really like that about him.
I guess maybe I don't know exactly how to think about the idea of psychology, because I don't, you know, I was just thinking about the situation like a lot of like the paintings of the self-eaters, I feel like they're just so matter of fact, and that a lot of them have a kind of potential deadpan to it, and I'm interested in that. But I do think that I do like some paintings that are, like I love Balthus. I think he's great. I guess that would be, I guess, a logical kind of painting, right? Is that what you mean?
No, psychology has frameworks for situations, and you don't embrace those frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
you're saying you're just doing it from your own perspective. So, okay.
Yeah.
There was one thing strange. I was writing down notes and drawing while you were talking, and when the moderator said the dates of your show, it looked like the same kind of intent your paintings seemed to have. It was 11/11/12 to 1/13/13. It seems incidental, but then it's sort of like I'm looking at the numbers. Is there intent here or not?
No. Sorry. No, sorry. When was the first? Was 11? First one was 11.
Okay.
11.
11/11/12 to 1/13/13, which I thought nothing of it when she said it, but when I wrote it down, it.
Yeah, no. No.
I'd like to follow up Kent's question there. You were saying that there's I'm over here by I'm over here.
Oh, hi. Oh,
You're
sorry. I'm
looking
like,
for me.
no, I didn't know. I was like, okay.
If you needed a face.
You know, it's really bright. No, sorry.
Yeah. Just to follow up Kent's question, you said there's you were talking about the face eaters. So we're looking at all these paintings, Sarah, being the audience. How many picnics did you paint, and how many face eaters did you paint? And are these all large scale? I mean, what is the scale of these paintings? I know some of the early ones were small, but
I only made one painting of a picnic, and it's sort of, I mean, it's kind of large. It's like maybe 7 feet by 7.5 or 8 feet or something. But I think with the paintings of the self-eaters, there was not all that many of them. There was, you know, was making the, you know, you sort of, I would make, they were more individual paintings, or I thought of them as more individual paintings. So I did think about them as kind of a series, but I think when I'm painting, I never get into this idea of working serially. I think of it more like a sort of a group of like short stories or something in a book. So like that a painting could have a kind of certain feeling to it, and it can work with the others. Or they play off of each other. Or at least I think about them that way in the studio. So, and in fact, I think the one time where I tried to work in series, it actually didn't quite work. I think when I thought, oh, I'll make all these portraits of this guy, like the last man on earth, and then I felt like it was something that I missed painting other things, or I felt like the paintings needed other situations around them.
I have a question, Dana. When you talked about each of the paintings, the avenue in was often the subject matter. Was always the subject matter, and how you came to that. But I almost had this feeling that almost you could have given the exact same talk, but without ever mentioning subject matter at all.
That's a good idea. I'm going to try that. That's a
Go
really
for
good
it.
idea. No, I don't know. I think that's something that maybe that's a byproduct of just even talking about work, you know? Because you sort of say, even when I title things, it's very simple, like, oh, it's a picnic. Like, I think this is like Singe Picnic. I think when you're making the painting, it becomes all these other things that are going on in the painting that are, I feel like have just as much kind of content, and also a kind of totally influence the way that the subject is read, or the way that I depict the subject. like I feel like when I'm thinking about things, I tend to think in terms of adjectives and adverbs, but that's so much about how you say something or how to describe something, and I think that's a lot like how I think about painting, I think, so. But yeah, I don't know, that's a good idea. I don't even know how I would begin to do that, really. This is a patterned field. The food looks French. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah.
I'm going to try to squeeze in about 2.5 questions here real fast. Does this, yeah, okay, so volume increase. I think it's about 10 years ago I saw a fairly large painting of yours at PS1. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And when looking at these paintings, one thing that I've really been speculating about is their size. So I'm imagining that 10 years ago you were painting large, and then maybe you started painting smaller. And so one question is was there a chronological order in the presentation of these paintings?
Yeah, these are all chronological, but
So the last paintings we saw were your most recent paintings.
Yeah. But I have always made large and small paintings. And I don't really think about them as even having a kind of hierarchy with each other. Like I feel like some of the small paintings, I feel like they have, it's important to me. I like them also together, like having like a really large painting next to something that's really small, because I feel like I'm really interested in the way that the viewer reads them physically, like those kinds of shifts. And I don't think about them as like these sort of large paintings being these kind of big major paintings, and like small paintings being just like a small, like I feel like sometimes it can, like some of my favorite paintings are the small paintings, but I've always like worked on both of them at the same time.
Now, one thing that really caught my attention is that a museum in Tehran bought one of your paintings. Did you go to Tehran? Is there anything you can tell us about Tehran relative to your art?
I had no idea. Sorry. No, I think I knew that a museum in Tehran bought one, but I've never been to Tehran. It's cool that the painting's there. I don't know. It would be fun to go. I would.
Because I thought figural work was against the prevailing religion of Tehran.
I don't know. I don't know.
Hello, way back here. I was curious, as you were describing many of your paintings, you were discussing the verbs and the adjectives that you used, or even just phrases, and it was exciting, as you said. And I thought about someone eating their head, and that was the image itself. And I was wondering, you also said that you write a lot. Is that kind of an integral part of your painting? Do you write and then paint? And as you write, do you visualize and kind of narrate what you're thinking about? Or is it just really a phrase, and then you begin the process?
I think it's more like listing. So I guess maybe writing's not the best way to put it. I'll usually write down ideas, or it's more like closer to brainstorming, and then sometimes sort of thinking about how the situation could expand, and I'll write it down so sometimes I don't forget it. But I think that a lot of times I also make like sort of thumbnail sketches, like small sketches to like figure out the sort of composition of the painting. But yeah, I think that sometimes it's more like closer to brainstorming. So you like write down an idea for a painting, and then you start to think about how it could be depicted. Like the painting of the swimming, smoking, crying, I had made an earlier version of that, and it was all wrong. Like everything about it was wrong, and I just like threw it away. Like I have it, but it's like not. I have trouble throwing things away, but I realized what it needed was it just needed atmosphere, and like before it was just too harsh and too flat, and everything about this idea of like tears and water and like your eyes and everything viscous, it felt like it needed to be described in a different way. So even this idea of like smoke being trapped underwater, So like I redid it and changed it, but a lot of that is like sort of just, you know, you think about like, well, what does this painting need, and like how, like you sort of think about it as a guiding principle beforehand, because I think because I'm not using sources, I feel like that's really helpful, or like a good way to generate information.
Got a question right over here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, Dana.
Hello.
I really enjoyed your talk.
Well, thanks.
And I just had a quick question. The idea that you put 3 different ideas together, I think it's fantastic. I'm just kind of wondering, maybe are there more that you're working on, may I ask, or are there some that you really kind of are still thinking about doing?
I only made 4, and I edited them out. I have them in here somewhere, but I won't go visit them. Sorry. But I made one that was like climbing, hugging, and mugging. There wasn't that many. I made a few, and then it was like, you know, I felt like then I wanted to paint other things. Started to get, I think, I don't know, I feel like there was sometimes there's a point where you know, you get what you want with a few paintings, and then you're just like, that's what, so I'm not doing them now. And sometimes ideas come back, like I feel like actually the swimming painting was closer to how we would swim, or this idea of like how we would swim, which was like something that I had written down before. So maybe it's even less about the idea of like the verbs, but more just about this feeling of how it would be to breathe or swim, you know. I mean, okay. Sorry.
The way you described your paintings, certainly you gave it all a narrative structure. You told us stories about them. Have you studied literature as well as painting?
No, not so much, but I do read mostly short stories, because I feel like that's what I have the time for. You know, and also I just like the compression of short stories, that there's a kind of intense sort of structure. I actually feel it's actually closer to maybe a painting, because like I like how there's a sort of quick rise to tension, or there's a tension in the story, and then it ends up having to resolve itself in some way very quickly. And like, so I like, but no, I haven't studied literature. I mean, it just in as much as anybody has, I guess. Sorry.
So I think we'll take just a couple more questions. So I see I have one down front. Any other final takers? Okay, great. 1 and 2. We'll be right back there.
Do you live with any of your work where you can see it?
Yeah, I have a few paintings. Some older ones. I have and they're here in this show, but there's like a few. I usually like to keep them, a few of them, because I think it's always good to see older paintings, and you really forget what they look like. And I think that's the same thing about having this show with 10 years of work, is that a lot of it I hadn't seen in 10 years, and so you completely, like, I wouldn't make a painting like how I would make it in 2003. So it was just really interesting to see them again. You know, it's just a totally different way of approaching the painting back then.
That's a terrific talk. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say something about this series that has been going on for quite a few years now. It is one of the most fantastic things that we've ever gotten here in the city of Denver. And I want to thank Kent and Vicki Logan. It's just the greatest.
Well, I think on that very positive ending note, I'd like to thank you all once again for joining us this evening, and thank Vicki and Kent Logan, of course, one more time.
Thank you very much.
And lastly, please